Oh man. All right, and I'm recording on my end. So how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. How
Yeah.
you been?
Oh, life's
I'm
great.
enjoying the scuffed beard, by the way, in recent
Thanks.
videos.
Thanks. I keep asking my wife like when I need to shave, because I'm getting more Grizzly Adams or like Santa Clausy by the day. And she's like, no,
Hmm.
keep it. And I'm just like, all right, I guess we got to keep going. So it is what it is. I'm trying to grow out my poofy fro up top. So we'll see how long that takes. I am getting older, so it's taking longer.
Yeah.
So how you living, bud? How you enjoying the Twitch sphere and internet politics and the holidays and all that stuff?
Pretty good. I recently had a convo on Friday with
Yeah,
someone on Prime's channel. Did you see any of that?
I didn't catch it, but I'm definitely going to watch it because that was actually one of the things that I kind of want to talk to you about. You often advertise yourself as the Twitch's resident, Zionist and neoliberal shill. If
Yeah.
I remember your tagline correctly. So I had to figure if it was a Zionism debate, it probably included a lot of your thoughts. So sorry if you have to
Yeah.
like rehash anything tonight, but I'm sure it was good.
No, I mean, it's not an issue. I mean, I know you had that interview with some Israeli leftist a while ago. I
Yeah.
haven't seen that. So, I mean, I'm sure you'll have some stuff from that you'll probably want to bring in. But
Yeah.
yeah, pretty much it was just a conversation with someone about, their understanding of Zionism and evangelical Zionism, how that mostly has to do with like Christians in the US. And, that kind of did come down to a really big point because I sort of went down how I'm in favor of the two-state solution. And he kind of found that weird considering how I label myself. So,
Yeah. Well, and there's degrees, right? Like there's like
mhm.
degrees of, I'm assuming when you say Zionism, you just mean that you support the right or you support the state of Israel and its right to exist. That's what I'm assuming you
Yeah.
mean. But that also gets into like the settlements and whether or not you want them to be scaled back or if you want to draw a
Hmm.
border now or, like kind of all that kind of stuff. And one of the interesting things about his conversation, because it's not even on like the American political radar, was apparently in Israel, it's actually on the political radar to like just go ahead with the one state solution, just to, kind of annex the West
Yeah.
Bank or whatever and just call it a day. And it is what it is. But
Yeah.
that opens up a can of worms of like, you know, Muslim slash Arab citizenship in the one state.
Yeah. Which I think has to do largely with, how much power, the Likud party has, and they're like the dominant party. Like their only opposition is really like I believe it's the Yesh Atid party, which is like a centrist party.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I think right now it's called the Blue and White Party because they're in a coalition with another one, but that's going to like dissolve pretty soon. So it's pretty much going to be them and then like the Arab Big Ten Party, which has no hope of getting a prime minister. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
parliamentary politics always seems like kind of brutal. Where it's like in America, it's really simple. Like Democrats are in charge or Republicans are in charge. Whereas like
yeah,
building coalitions or top 10 anime betrayals and parliamentary politics and like all that kind of
yeah,
shit seems like there's a lot of potential intrigue over it. Even talking about like parliamentary politics in like Canada or the UK,
yeah.
seems like rife for weird alliances that you wouldn't expect.
I mean, I would say they're more balanced there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
three or four parties in their parliament is different. Like, a lot of people talk about how having a two-party system is like kind of bad, but then I look at Israel and it's like 13 fucking parties, and I was like, well, actually, maybe the two-party system isn't that bad. Maybe there are worse options.
Yeah,
See
there's a certain
Exhibit
amount of
A. Yeah,
there's a certain amount of product or predictability to our politics or like but that's also the problem, right? Is everybody is so sick of the predictability that like it seems like no matter how much will on the ground there is for a particular social movement, it just doesn't seem to like it seems to take like a half decade to a decade for Capitol Hill to catch up with Main Street, at least
yeah,
if you're not talking about decades. But
and there's
mhm.
yeah.
Well, where do you want to start? I mean, I'd be more than happy to start with like Zionism and Israel and all that kind of stuff. But like I don't want to bore you to death either. So like if you've had like the I'm Jewish and American conversation like a million times, like we can talk about other stuff. But obviously, like if that's one of your primary identifiers, being Jewish in America is obviously like, I don't want to say controversial, but it's kind of like you're at the center of a lot of like political stuff, and by that I mean like, the alt-right going after Jewish people, kind of like the state of Israel and our alliance with them being central to a decent chunk of our politics. There's a lot that comes with Jewish identity that I'm sure you didn't ask for when you were born.
Well, the thing about that is like this is actually something more I put upon myself, really, because the truth is, I'm Jewish in one way, but I'm not Jewish in the other, and I'm Jewish in the less important way.
Okay.
I'm actually not religiously Jewish. My parents decided actually pretty early on that they wanted to raise me as Christian. My dad's mom was not in favor of that, but pretty soon after she passed away, when I was very young, he actually ended up getting baptized. That didn't last really very long because I had a very early edgy atheist phase. I was kind of ahead of my time on that phase.
What, at like 5? Like, what are we talking about?
Fifth grade.
Wow. So what would that be? Like 11 or 12 or like 10 or something?
Well, I'm actually on the upper end. Like I started high school at 15, so I was 11 in 5th grade.
Okay. All right. Jeez.
Yeah.
Most people haven't figured out anything by 11, let alone whether or not God exists.
Yeah. I'm a late bloomer in everything except for that area for some unbeknownst reason. But,
hey, well, whatever. We all pick our battles, so that's funny that was yours. But so are both your parents like Christian? Are they still Christian? Do they practice? Like what's kind of the story there?
They're kind of observant. I don't
observant
remember.
Christians?
Sort of. Like they believe in God, but they don't go to church. Last time I remember going to church at all was like in middle school. That became like a big thing in 5th and 6th grade. I like verbally fought them intensely on like, I'm not going to church. Fuck you. I'm not doing this. Which is kind of crazy that like I even fought with them about and somehow managed to win at the age of 12.
Yeah, I was about to say, is this the spirit of your grandmother coming through you? Is this like like her revenge is like, oh, you want to be Christian? Okay, cool. I'm gonna make your
think again. Yeah.
Well, sorry. Go ahead.
If anything, it's actually more the spirit of my uncle because both of my dad was raised Jewish. He ended up leaving it. My uncle just went full atheist. So that's probably more of him. And also like in middle school, we kind of became CEOs and that sort of ended in high school. Then we kind of just gave up on like going to church. It's like, whatever,
What do you mean by CEO? You took over a corporation? What are we talking about?
Oh, no. CEO is, I'm not sure if you've ever heard this, but it's like an acronym more religious Christians use to say Christmas and Easter only.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I was actually going to say that because that was one of the things that my parents railed against because we were an always Sunday, like every Sunday Christian for my entire life. So basically, like it gets busy on Easter and it gets busy on Christmas, and you get that air of superiority, and you're just like, look at all these. Eastern Christian motherfuckers hogging up all the parking spots, bunch of hypocrites, and like it's fun, it wasn't worth the 52 weeks and 52 hours of Catholic mass, but you did get to be a little bit superior to everyone on Christmas and Easter, so that was good.
Yeah. Like, I've never seen you before. I've been here for the past several months.
Straight up.
Where are you?
Yeah, straight up. You knew? And they're like, no, I've been going to this church for like 5 years. And you're like, no, you haven't.
Yeah,
But
it's like when you have been going to a gym and then there's a shit ton of new people in January
yeah,
and you just give them that
literally.
sly look like, I know why you joined and I know you're going to be gone in a month. And
Right.
you know
Yeah.
too.
Precisely.
Yeah.
No, that's funny. But like, so for you, is it more of like, so oftentimes we get really tripped up, or a lot of people get really tripped up over like, is a Jewish identity? Is it religious? Is it ethnic? Is it,
Hmm.
is it a nation? Like what's kind of, and the truth is, it's kind of all of those wrapped into some kind of weird amalgamation, more or less. So
Yeah.
so would you say that yours is your identification with Jewishness is like primarily ethnic? What would you say it is?
Yeah, it's pretty much solely ethnic. I
Mm,
knew that my dad's side was Jewish, but obviously, in Judaism, that doesn't make you half Jewish. That
mm,
doesn't even, give you credence to call yourself that. But I remember pretty early on, I think sometime in high school, I ended up deciding that for my birthday or Christmas, I wanted
mm,
to do an ancestry test, and I did
mm,
that, and I unfortunately don't have the access to it because it was this really old email that had a
mm,
really cringe username that I ended up deactivating. So I don't have access to the results anymore. But
mm,
the last time I checked it, it told me that I was 26% European Jewish. So I know that
mm,
I'm like about a fourth Jewish.
mm,
I have family from certain parts of Eastern Europe, even, you know, people who my dad knew, my great grandpa who was actually a baseball coach. Um, he was from Czechoslovakia and he
mm,
was Jewish. And I know that I have extended family that ended up leaving Europe before that, the whole, what happened.
mm,
Um, some who didn't. So I always kind of felt personally connected to like the history of World War II in a way. And I've learned a lot about it. And I cry when I listen to Itzhak Perlman play Schindler's List because of that and stuff
mm.
and so on. So yeah, this was just sort of something I developed in the latter part of high school. And yeah.
Were there people who like encouraged you in that? So for instance, like for me, like I'm probably 100% either like Celt or Anglo, and there like might be a little bit of like French or Czech like mixed in there, but it predominantly Celt. Like I'm you know freckled and I sunburn easily, and I am able to drink a lot naturally and have a high
That sounds
tolerance.
Irish.
Yeah, Celt. So
Oh, I thought Celt was Scottish. Okay.
yeah, well, Celts is kind of like it's kind of like a pre-national ethnic group, I guess. So Celts, like they settled in the Iberian Peninsula, and they settled in France, and they settled in like all this kind of stuff. But if you look at it genetically, it's like a certain ethnic group that dominated like northwestern Europe, and particularly
Hmm.
Ireland for a really long time. But that was. But that's the thing is like even in some of my videos I just mentioned the fact that like a lot of people talk about like the black identity in America being kind of like a unique American construction because of like deracination or like cultural obliteration, where like you just don't know what you are anymore, your language is dead, your traditions are dead, like all that kind of stuff, so you just kind of become black. Whereas with like white people, I kind of agree with that too, because like I have very little connection to the Irish identity besides like
Hmm.
again like a few genetic knickknacks and maybe like a historical affinity, like just like a familiarity and kind of like a mild love for it that's almost subconscious. But that's kind of where it's like it seems like you kind of took this on yourself. So is that kind of
Hmm.
like, is it something your parents encouraged? Was it family that encouraged you? Did you find people who were like you? Like who kind of did anybody help you with that kind of like taking on of that persona and identity?
No, I don't think so. My family definitely didn't encourage it. If
Mm-hmm.
anyone did, it would have been my grandpa. Um, he's like my only living grandparent, and he is Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
But we never really talked about that. We more connected through the fact that I played jazz all throughout high school, so
Mm-hmm.
that was sort of like our bonding area. Not at all like talking about Judaism or Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I think if any one person had an influence on me, it would probably, ironically, be Ben Shapiro because and we can talk about my political journey, but I had a
Yeah,
very
please.
strong libertarian phase
Mm-hmm.
in senior year, even to the point where like I ended up like getting this mug, which I kind of like using as a prop. Because if I'm going to talk to Prime and be like, "Oh, I'm ready to make you cry,"
Yeah.
you know, um, but yeah, he probably had the biggest. I think the other biggest influence is probably like identity politics,
Mm-hmm.
if anything, because I'm from a super progressive area. I have met like full on communists in high school. I've met more communists at my high school than Republicans. Like
Yeah.
that's how fucking cobalt blue the area I live in is. Like that shit is crazy.
Well, and I'm
So
assuming you're in the Northeast. Like I'm not. I'm
no,
guessing. Really?
Midwest. Yeah, north.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I'm from Illinois.
Okay. And then, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, I think I heard you say a few times that you and Pisco were like boys or whatever. Like, are you guys just internet acquaintances? Or are you guys like familiar personally? Did you come up together? What's kind of the story there?
No, just internet boys.
Mm,
We had a really interesting interaction.
mm.
The first time I met him was on. I'm not how familiar with your Tiberius D.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. The conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mm.
I met him on his panel, and I actually got into an argument with him on the Second Amendment.
Okay.
And at the time, I did not know he was a third-year law student,
Yeah.
so
Fuck
I
it.
accidentally threw myself in the deep end without realizing it,
Yeah.
which was kind of funny. And I ended up talking to my dad about it, and I mentioned at the end of that, like, I'm gonna have to talk to my judge dad about this. And he's
Mm.
immediately like, "Wait, your dad's a judge?" He's like, what kind of judge is he? Like, can you put in a good word for me? I was like, dude, you live in New York. You're probably never going to interact with him. Okay.
Hey, I
But
mean, the more people like it's
yeah,
networking and all that kind of shit. So
yeah. But
nice.
that's a big meme. I mean, I think the Ben Shapiro phase definitely did have an influence on my cadence. I've been
Mm-hmm.
called Ben Shapiro Jr. a few times.
Nice.
So my dad's a judge is like the whole my wife's a doctor. That's like
Mm-hmm.
my version of it because I also bring it up like way too much.
My dad's a
Um,
judge.
yeah, like I mean, that's usually when I bring up Pisco. I'm like, well, Pisco isn't here, and my dad's a judge, so I do think I'm the the legal expert for the time being.
Right. Yeah. No, that's fun.
So
No, that's awesome.
yeah,
That's cool. I love the lore of like internet relationships because it's funny
hmm
when you bust into like the Twitch politics thing or whatever. Like a lot of people already know each other, have debated each other previously, all that kind of
hmm
stuff. Some people like borderline have like wrestling relationships, like where they're kind of ready to butt heads, but they're kind of like talking shit in a fun way, like before and after the streams. So it's interesting learning how people know each other and interact with each other. So that's
hmm
really cool. But yeah,
yeah,
so like so that's really interesting because I had like a whole bunch of like really stereotypical questions to ask you, but it seems like you kind of you're not a stereotypical person. So it's
yeah,
kind of like, hey, what do you think about the way that American Jewish identity functions in this way? But really, like your family kind of got away from that shit, and
yeah,
you're charting your own course, which is kind of that's
yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
I just decided to go to the route of like I am a fourth Jewish, and I feel proud of my Jewish heritage. And I think this stuff that happened to them in the
Hmm.
40s, and obviously the millennia and a half of oppression beforehand was
Hmm.
also awful. It sort of seems like to me the Holocaust was like the uh, camel that the hay that broke the camel's back.
Hmm.
Um, I'm really bad with metaphors, so
I understood it.
I
I'm good with
yeah
it. But
uh,
but
I
that but that
yeah.
that my question kind of though is like so for instance, like I know there, or at least I've heard it articulated, I think actually from the lefty Jewish person that I interviewed,
Mhm,
that like there is this, so everybody, especially like white nationalists or the groypers or whatever, they have this concern about like the Jewish plot to take over the world, and Jewish intelligence and
mhm,
Mossad and like all this kind of bullshit. But what I found interesting was looking at it from the other side. There's actually like a lot of cultural pressure amongst Jewish folks who either like ethnically identify or religiously identify or nationally identify, to maintain their heritage. And that's actually really interesting because like if it wasn't for you, generationally, potentially that heritage would have been lost. Like if you weren't interested and you're just like, I'm just, I'm an American white guy, I'm just going to be a Christian, who cares? And then you just kind of moved on. There would have been like almost like a loss of that heritage in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Have you ever considered that, or have you ever felt that pressure?
No, not at all, because my almost all of my dad's side, so my dad has 3 siblings. One of them passed away when I was pretty young. My other one is an atheist, and he's like also on his 3rd wife and is never having kids. So that ship sailed a while ago. And then my dad obviously
I just mean even I don't even mean like ethnically or genetically. I meant like religiously or culturally, you know what I'm saying? Like if you hadn't taken on the mantle of like I am a Jewish person, then you effectively would have been just Americanized, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I do feel it. I guess in that sense I do feel it a little bit because of the fact that my siblings don't care at all. My brother's like my uncle. The idea of him having kids is way out the window. So I do kind of feel like the idea of passing on that identity to my kids maybe a little bit. I've made a lot of jokes about how, at X number of followers, I'm going to convert to Judaism because I'm tired of fucking explaining this like every goddamn time people come to my channel. So
why don't you just do it? Like I mean, seriously, because
I mean, I should, but like I don't know. Part of me just feels like that it would be weird because the thing is, like, I don't see myself as becoming religious ever.
Right.
I consider myself an agnostic deist. I feel like there's just so much shit out there that it's hard to explain without a god. But the idea of like believing in a certain, I don't know, creature that resembles this higher power. Like I believe in a higher power, but I don't really believe in a god. Like I feel like the idea that this higher power is a god and I'm going to pray to him X number of times and I do these, like it feel weird and also look really out of place. It would look like I'm having some quarter life crisis because it's like I am surrounded by like Christians who aren't even CEOs, and I'm in the fucking corner doing Baruch Adonai with myself. And it's like, what happened here? Like, you okay, buddy? You need some friends?
Yeah. Well, I know. For instance, like, who is it? Jon Stewart or whatever. Like, he described himself as like a bagel Jew or something like that, where he has like these few cultural traditions that he holds on to, but he's not particularly religious, and it's obviously a part of his identity ethnically, and he has his sympathies and all that kind of stuff, but it's not like a large part of the religion specifically is not a large part of his identity, and I think that's interesting.
I have one, and that's ending my toast with l'chaim, and that's about it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, fair enough. I mean, slancha, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So that makes a shitload of sense. Well, okay, so why don't we that way we just don't like beat around the Jewish bush forever. Why don't you kind of run us through like the politics and like kind of how you became who you became now, and like what you see your advocacy is, what you see your role in like Twitch politics and like all that kind of stuff. Like what's the story there?
So, I guess that makes sense to transition essentially since I kind of found my Jewishness through like becoming political. So I guess I'll start with the one that people usually don't believe, which is that I actually used to be a Bernie bro, believe it or not, back in the day. I'm from a super, super progressive area, fucking cobalt blue, might as well be black colored part of northern Illinois. Super diverse community. The only way I really knew of thinking was like the liberal way. My dad is probably the most base centrist I know. The dude can also grill really well, so it makes sense. But he never was super political in the way that like my mom was. So I really only knew a liberal way of thinking, a left-wing way of thinking, and then when I was in high school, I think it was sometime around junior year, I fell down the Milton Friedman rabbit hole on YouTube. And so I kind of became like super libertarian because I was like, holy shit, there's this entirely new way of, I didn't know that there was more than one political ideology, for God's sake. So of course I'm going to be super hyped about this. Oh my God, I can be super freedom and we can have a really small government. And, so I kind of was super excited to, find like a new way of thinking. And I kind of went down that way. And then as I got into more Twitch, which was like 2019, I've known for Twitch about a while, but I first started getting into Twitch in like August of 2019. And I found Bastier and LectureFan around the same time. So I actually used to watch LectureFan for a while when I was more of a libertarian.
Is that so when people are like fans of LectureFan, do they spell it out like LCTR or something like that? Is that his acronym? Yeah. Okay, all right, cool. Getting more familiar with Twitch lore.
Yeah. I have a feeling a lot of people are going to start comparing your beard to LectureFan, so get ready for that.
It's happened.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, so I started moderating a little bit more towards the center as I started college. And that's also a really interesting story I'd love to get into. But I started moderating towards the center, and I sort of just became a neoliberal because I realized that like I noticed I was shifting more to the center, and I had to like stop and think and be like, okay, I actually know I need to think about like what do I actually care about? What are the things that matter to me? And I realized that it's like, well, liberty and freedom. I care a lot about the freedom of choice and people's free will. Like I'm a big believer in free will and controlling their destiny in life. But I also realize that like I need to sort of meet in the middle with some sort of utilitarianism and be like, okay, this idea of freedom, like I can have a utopian world that looks libertarian or even ANCAP-ish, and be like, okay, this is nice, but let's live in the real world. And what should we actually have?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I became a neolib.
Well, and then so neoliberal is kind of it's almost like a universally dirty word in the spaces that we operate in. Especially like progressive politics. Like I mostly, if you were to go like definitionally like off of faction, I'm assuming like I would be like a pro-gun liberal, like that would be like my actual designation. But when you're swimming in like lefty circles, like anything to the right of like Marxist-Leninism or anarcho-communism is like fascism. So like it's actually really fun because I get called a conservative, and I'm like yes. Because there are things that I want to conserve that you do not think are important, and that's the role of a conservative. But I'm pretty sure I understand your leftist arguments a lot more than the average conservative who's just like, they just think that like religion, like here's a whole bunch of religious precepts. I'm a religious person. This applies to my politics. Therefore, like my worldview cannot shift from this like dogmatic worldview. And like that's where I actually have a lot of fun in political debates because I can actually shift with new information. I don't have to stick with the same 12 talking points, and I can learn new things and change my perspective as a result. But that's so how do you describe neoliberalism, and why isn't it a dirty word to you?
Well, one of the reasons why is because the word liberal is a dirty word to leftists. Like, let's be real here. Yeah. If you disagree with them enough, they're just going to call you like, you're just a stupid lib cuck. Yeah. And in the same way that, like, someone like LectureFan will be like, these stupid liberals. And so something that pisses me off about like right wingers like that is that they conflate the term liberal and leftist. It's like if you ever take 10 minutes to talk to a leftist, you would realize that they literally use the word liberal as like an insult. Like, no, we do not agree. We go against each other more than we agree. But It's not a dirty word to me because I think the idea of liberalism or libertarianism isn't dirty to me because the whole idea of liberty and freedom, like that's a very attractive concept. Like,
Ew, gross. Yeah, why don't we live in an authoritarian shithole? Why can't I dictate everything about somebody else's life? Like, and that's where I get really frustrated because it's like if you were to talk to libertarians, like I consider myself a libertarian for a really long time, but libertarians consider libertarian to mean anarcho-capitalist. That's what they mean by libertarianism. So you kind of get kicked out of that group.
At least party-wise, I would say, like we have a libertarian party in the U.S., and I think that's kind of why that has that. Because if you've seen clips from those debates, there are people talking about like driver's licenses, and then Gary Johnson is like, well, I'd like people to show some sort of that's Stalinism.
Yeah, like heroin for toddlers. Yeah, yeah, dude. Like I'm sure a decent chunk of it is memes, but also it's like Jesus Christ. Like, and that's why I don't take the libertarian. Like for me, that's why I don't take the Libertarian Party seriously because they appeal to so many anarcho-capitalists that they're not going to be able to push a more mainstream incremental program that appeals to a wide base because they have to appeal to the people who are actually paying them dues. But that's so that's where I don't know, like I appreciate your incrementalism, but also it's like, sometimes you feel like you're on a fucking island, like if you don't have like a dogmatic set of beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel that way, especially in church politics, because I feel like there are I'm all over the board in certain areas. Like I know we had that one Monday panel where there are a lot of people canceled, and that's sort of my thing when it comes to social issues. Like I'm generally pretty liberal, except for when we get into like a more society-wide context about sex. And then people think I immediately go hard right. And it's like, not really. I mean, if you go down that rabbit hole with me, you find out I'm actually just a sex negative feminist, which is, a position that I hold on to.
Turf.
Yeah, something like that. I do feel like that in a way because I have like, I'm focused more on policy and I want to be more moderate. And when you notice like which kind of attracts large audiences and followings, you notice it's like more people at the extremes. Like, you have people like Hassan and Vosh who are really popular and they're just full on like communists or socialists. Well, it's socialist / communist respectively would be it. And then you have like Lecture Fan, who's like the biggest Trumple and will say the craziest things. It's called the Democrats Marxist, and it's like, all right. So these are the crazies I'm dealing with, and I feel alone.
Well, yeah, but what is it? I forget it. I forget who it is, but it's I think it's like Chesty Puller. He's a Marine Corps hero. He's like, we're surrounded, but that means that we can fight in any direction. And that's the benefit to like centrism or trying to be nuanced or anything like that is like, you can basically, and this has happened to me before where I've had like a passionate, like visceral debate with like Fanatic or Demon Mama or something like that. And we'll just be at complete odds. Everybody's getting triggered and upset and like all that kind of shit. And then 20 minutes later with the next question, we like agree 90%, like with each other. So that's actually what I really enjoy about Twitch politics is, and then also the other thing that I really enjoy is that I keep trying to predict what the positions of people are going to be as I'm rolling into a show, and they're completely fucking different. And the people that I thought I was going to be fighting with, I'm not, and the people that I am fighting with are on my side, and on my side. Like, so it's crazy. It's actually, that's part of the reason why I like panel shows is because they're so unpredictable. Like you think you're walking into an argument, and you know what everybody's going to say, and then they just completely surprise you. It's really fun.
Yeah, like that one Monday show, I did not expect that. Towards the latter half, I'd be arguing with you about civil libertarianism and the idea that we should legalize all drugs and prostitution.
Yeah.
Like, I did not think that was going to come up, and that would be an argument, but we were there anyway.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and it is because I've been digesting as much as I still hold on to what I would call like a functional core of like right-wing belief, because I was raised conservative, but I'm probably temperamentally liberal. But I think you need both things for a society to function. And one of the things, or one of the arguments that I kind of ingested is like, principles are great. And I love principles, and there's principles that I even think are worthy of fighting and dying for in order to maintain a free society. But that being said, if you're adhering to principles that literally make the world a worst place, maybe you need to revise your principles. And that's kind of where, for me, like libertarianism is actually incredibly morally simple. Like, don't hurt people, don't take their shit, and like those are good rules. But there's also like complexities, like risky behavior. There's complexities by like family impacts. There's complexities like overall social impact. So if I lived in a purely principled anarcho-capitalist society, but it was falling apart, the infrastructure sucked, families sucked, everybody was a junkie, people were killing each other in the streets because they weren't obeying the rules, and like all that kind of shit. It's like that's actually what I don't like about like utopian anarchism, is that in an anarchist society, everybody has to believe the same thing that you do, or else it doesn't work. And nobody believes the same shit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely true, especially like when it comes to anarcho-capitalism. I mean, kibbutzes actually did kind of work for a little bit, and then they stopped because it's like you can have an actual economy like that. So yeah,
it's tough to be efficient or have like a large amount of growth. I'm actually I'm relatively familiar. I took a business class specifically about it, like because Israel's like a newer country. It's only been around since like 1948, and they started out socialist and have become pretty capitalistic pretty quick. So obviously they still have their social safety programs and like all that kind of stuff, but at the same time, like the beauty of the kibbutz is communal living, people taking care of each other, everybody develops a lot of skills like farming and family rearing and self-defense and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is when you're living communally, there's not a whole lot of time or opportunity to work with other skills, for people to specialize. And that was kind of one of the things that they realized as Israel was growing, was that they wanted to specialize so they could grow the country, grow the economy. And that's kind of where like the market started taking over. And actually, that's really funny, because I think Israel is one of the few like socialist countries that kind of like went capitalist without a shot fired. It was just kind of like a cultural, it was just like a cultural shift towards what works.
I think it was more just like, hey, we should have a national economy. And then the people on the kibbutzes were like, we agree. And it's like, okay, you Jews were enough to get rid of this whole system then. And it's like, yeah, we know. It's like, and you're okay with that? Sure, why not? And then it's like, all right, let's go capitalist.
Well, and I'm sure raising kids and farming and defending your own property probably gets exhausting after a while. So like specialization is probably... it's not perfect. I think Robert Heinlein said specialization is for ants, but there's also like an efficiency to specialization as well that I think can't be denied.
I mean, there are all sorts of quotes like that, that sound nice, that can work in certain contexts, like over specialization to a point. Like you might want to bring up that quote, but that's like when people mention Keynes, like, well, in the long run, we're all dead. It's like, well, okay, we should still focus on long-run growth of the economy, you doofus. And I think that actually goes back to the whole point you mentioned when it comes to like, we tend to agree 90% of the time. Then when we don't, it's a vicious argument. Yeah, like, that's one thing I've noticed was leftists. Like, temperamentally, they're fine. They aren't that inclined to scream at me. But when I do have big disagreements, it's usually on economics. And when I hear leftists talk about economics, like I'm ready to pounce. I'm foaming at the mouth to like scream into my mic. Because I know they're about to say some dumb shit.
Well, yeah, but didn't you know that you were just indoctrinated by the capitalist class to believe what you believe, and economists just sniff their own farts, and that it's all bullshit and it doesn't matter. See, I would be more sympathetic to the economics is voodoo magic if like capitalist societies weren't like insanely wealthy. Like obviously, like there's a problem with like economic distribution, but even the poor people, like in like I'm not trying to say everything's perfect, but even poor people have smartphones. Even poor people have cars. Even poor people have some level of housing. Even poor people have access to like internationally sourced consumer goods and groceries. There's problems with wealth. There's problems with inefficiency. There's problems with environmentalism when it comes to capitalism. But then you look at like centrally commanded economies, and it's just like, dude, it's not even an argument. Like what the fuck? Yeah. I get socialism doesn't necessarily mean a centrally planned economy, but Jesus Christ, it's like if you're talking about seizing the means of production, and outlawing capital and outlawing the ownership class, like the bourgeois class, that's going to involve some level of like central power, and they just never explain that shit, or explain it sufficiently to me that I think that they have a workable model.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way I see it is that like they get mad that America is not at the middle ground area that like Scandinavia and some parts of Western Europe. Because like when you look at certain countries, there are countries that took a while to either, become capitalist. Like Eastern Europe is behind Western Europe because they were behind the Iron Curtain. You also have Asian countries that were less developed. And then Asian and African countries that are less developed because of, issues with trade, like China. There was a year in the 90s where they had a GDP growth of over 12%. Like their economy just fucking jacked up and like started taking steroids like on the daily because they immediately embraced free trade. And so there's this nuanced middle ground between embracing the capitalist market, the free market and free trade, but also like being equitable with having like socialized programs and income equality.
Well, that's one of the funny things is like, so first they'll argue that like the metrics don't mean anything, and then they'll bring up that like Russia and China had like explosive growth, but it's also like but that's also a question of like industrialization. Like when you move from like borderline like agrarian peasant feudal societies into like an industrial society or into like a modern service industry, you're going to have these explosions when you're completely changing the economy. And that's like that's what I find frustrating is like I talk to very smart people all of the time, like lefty, centrist, right wing, whatever, but they'll take a fact and then they'll just blow that fact out of proportion without contextualizing it at all and think that they have like a solid argument. And that's really frustrating for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, it can be frustrating having a conversation on anything that's nuanced, I feel like, in the Twitch politics sphere.
But everything is nuanced, bro. Everything is nuanced.
I mean, everything is nuanced, but there are some areas that are just much more nuanced. And it's really frustrating when, like, I'm a big data and numbers guy. Like, I like data and numbers and, like, quantifiable facts. And when it comes to econ, that's where I'm always going to be the most malleable because I want my ideas to follow the facts. Like I want to have a pretty utilitarian view of that. And there are just some people who won't do that because they'll be like, but co-ops, but capital. And it's like, but you're not even listening to the words coming out of my mouth. It's like they come out and then they just whoosh so hard. And you're like, well, but in a socialist society, it's like, no. Like address my point, and they won't want to because they just want to lecture and get on their soapbox about how awesome socialism is, and workers can decide everything, even though that's like true.
Man. So I got into it with Mix the other day, Mix Vivian Wolf, because I literally asked. I was like, okay, socialism is awesome. Let's just concede that socialism is awesome and that the idea of socialism is awesome. Do you have a single like historical example of socialism working properly where we actually transition to this like no central authority, no authoritarianism, no slaughters, none of that shit, and also like a ceding of the power from the central government to the to the people. And I got like a huff and puff and like, oh, well, I'm not going to go down like the historical examples route. Like I was being bad faith because I was bringing up history as an argument. And it's like, no, bro, I'm not being bad faith. I'm just seeing if the people who subscribe to your ideas are able to implement any of them anywhere ever without like turning their fucking countries into authoritarian shitholes. Because I don't think we have a single historical example yet. So the idea of socialism is attractive, and I think that's why it's popular. But if you don't have a single historical example of it going the way that you wanted it to, then what the fuck is the point? And that's my problem. Is like Hassan is basically like radicalizing a bunch of 15-year-old fucking girls and fucking Twitter leftists into thinking socialism is fucking awesome. And it's like, bro, like if you can't make it work, what's the fucking point? You're just gonna create a new shithole.
Yeah, that is exactly the main issue at play. And I feel like that is like a big issue with it is that, and there's like, well, that's not, it's the no Scotsman fallacy. Something really funny to me that I find hilarious is that there are a lot of leftists who love to talk philosophy and the big lofty complex parts of philosophy, but they forget their philosophy 101, which is that like philosophy is like the study of thinking. And they forget the most basic fallacies. Like I have never met a full-on socialist or a full-on communist who does not fall into the no Scotsman fallacy. And they'll be like, "Well, that wasn't real socialism." Well, that wasn't. It's like they'll do that over and over.
But I'll push back. I'll push back on you with the no Scotsman fallacy because I believe them, and I believe them when they're saying that it's not real socialism. Because the goal of socialism or communism is actually like an abolishing of the state, the ceding of the power to the community, the democratization of the workforce, and like all that kind of stuff for the people to own the means of production, and for a lot of essential goods and services to be decommodified to the point that things that are human necessities are just provided, and not by some like authoritarian super state, but just provided on like a equal, justified hierarchy playing field. But this is the same problem with socialism and communism that I have with anarchism in general, is that it only works when everybody believes in it. If you have people who don't believe in it, you have to force them to do that, which necessitates a central authoritarian government to force everybody to do this. And that's that's the concession that I can't get. It's like, okay, your goal is good and your goal has never happened before. So I won't say that socialism has actually happened before, but everybody who subscribes to your belief and tried to implement it in the real world killed the fuck out of a shitload of people and intimidated loads more. So why don't you go back to the fucking the drawing board, and then that's where I lose them because I'm attacking their fucking favorite idea.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, you're right about like this isn't correct, and they will bring up the definition of, well, socialism is the workers controlling the means of production versus, and I will mention examples of state socialism, which is where the state controls it. And
that's state capitalism, bro.
Well, no, it's actually state socialism is when the government controls the means of production. State capitalism is more what China does, where it's like they control everything that they do within the country and also outside of the country. Like they're being capitalist with the rest of the world.
What's funny is how much of the Chinese model actually matches like the ideology of National Socialism, like Germany's model.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes sense considering they're about to commit they are committing the next Holocaust against Uyghur Muslims.
But thank God for cheap iPhones and sneakers, right?
Yeah, but the problem is we can get that from other countries, like Vietnam and Indonesia and India. That they have their issues, but their violations of human rights are significantly less egregious.
Right.
But to go back to the whole socialism and communism thing, that is a big thing because I think that's the reason why I just have such a visceral hatred of communists, which is that they're almost all anarchists. And I would rather gouge my eyes out with a kitchen spoon than have to deal with anarchists on a daily basis, because they're literally the
welcome to Twitch politics, bro.
IQ people. Like, I'm amazed that the thing is, I'm amazed that last username can sound as smart as he is. I feel like he has
hold on 1 second. I got a dog. I gotta let him in. I love last username. Is it LUE? LEU? What do people call him? They call him an acronym.
Yeah, they call him LU.
LU?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Hold on. Let me let the dog in. I love LU, and he actually is a smart guy, which is funny because he always has these concessions about how fucked up the world is, but then he's still an ANCAP. So, like, 1 second. Can I help you?
I'm aware.
Good job, buddy. All right. Sorry about that. It's not a Counterpoints episode unless I have a dog asking to come in the room. So.
Your dog is a very pretty dog, by the way. So.
Thank you. So this isn't the new one is not the one that's asking to come in. He's only been on stream a couple of times, but he's also gorgeous. He just he has very stubby legs. He's a dwarf Brittany Spaniel, so he looks like a Brittany Spaniel, but then he has like stubby legs like a Basset Hound or a Corgi. I fucking love that dog. But yeah, getting back to like dealing with anarchists. So I'm sure you'll have some spicy comments in at least the video that I post to my channel, because like I have a decent chunk of like lefties or whatever who follow me for being the good faith righty or whatever. But it's I can't tell how much of it is like being young. I can't tell how much of it is being idealistic. I can't tell how much of it is reading some philosophers that you really like. So for instance, like your younger phase with like libertarianism, Milton Friedman, Ben Shapiro. Like I can't tell how much of it is that. And like I don't want to shit talk people who find philosophies that they like. Like I'm a Jordan Peterson stan. You know what I'm saying? But like, you know, I also concede that one of my favorite social and political figures has a benzodiazepine addiction and fucking has a weird ass diet. You know what I'm saying? And like a fucked up family. So that's kind of where I don't see the concession that maybe you could be wrong. And that's another thing that really frustrates me is when people are like, no, I am right. Nothing can change my worldview. You are wrong, and you are bad for being wrong. And it's like, bro, like that's just like not even how the world works. That's not even how life works. So.
I mean, well, yeah. The world is a very complicated place, and people just try and like boil it down and oversimplify so much. But I feel like Twitch politics, because of the way it skews, doesn't even always deal in the real world. Like we will love to talk about hypotheticals, but I'm someone who gets very bored by that. And I will just like, I'll eventually just be like sleeping like this. Like, can we talk about actual policy?
Which is funny because they probably feel the inverse, where if you got into the nitty gritty of policy, they'd be like, ugh.
Like, dude, can we just talk about my socialist utopia already? It's like, no, we can't, because it's not interesting and it's not going to actually get anything done.
Well, actually, I have to side with the hypotheticals crew, because oftentimes, like, when you get down into like, is universal health care ideal for the United States, or what does a civil war look like, or what does what does political violence or terrorism in the United States look like? Like a lot of these ideas are abstract and kind of like we have no control over them. So oftentimes we're just swimming in hypotheticals. So to get it down to, well, this isn't going to happen because Mitch McConnell's an asshole, or this isn't going to happen because the political will doesn't exist in the Democrat Party in order to actually implement it. It's like, dude, that's borderline super discouraging, because our boomer politicians are about 30 to 40 years behind anything that's on the ground.
Okay, I mean, yeah, that's true. I don't tend to go that far and be like, oh, well, the political capital isn't here for this idea. And it's like,
you just mean what policy would actually solve the problem?
Say that again?
You actually just mean like what policy would actually solve the problem?
Yeah. Not like what is something we could get passed in the next year. I'm more thinking like what is something reasonable in the next decade. Because for healthcare, sure, that might not happen because Mitch McConnell's an asshole. But in a decade, that dude's probably going to be retired, living with Elaine Chao somewhere in a cottage home,
or dead,
or dead.
He hasn't looked the most healthy recently, and a lot of our politicians are super old.
Yeah,
I'm actually,
he'd probably die from plastic straws.
dude, I am terrified of the next generation of American politics because it's going to be people in my age group.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy thinking about, like, people born in the 90s and 80s being in power.
Congressmen and senators.
Yeah.
Dude,
Yeah.
Gen X is not that big of a generation.
It's really not.
Older millennials are going to be the new political figureheads, and so many of them are dipshits.
Yeah. I feel like for each AOC that we'll end up joining, for each AOC and Ayanna Pressley, we're going to need a couple of Ben Shapiro ripoffs, to keep them in check.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I mean, that's an interesting thing, like the skewing of the Overton window, like to the left, which happened significantly since, in 2014 we started seeing it, but when Bernie Sanders ran, do you see the Overton window compared to then to now? It's skewed. And even like in Congress, like I wasn't focused on politics when fucking Nancy Pelosi was considered a firebrand liberal. I was too busy playing on my Pokemon on my blue DSi.
Right.
But I still know about it, and now she's considered like the moderate who needs to reel in the squad.
Yeah.
And it's like, how much further left are we going to move in the next decade? Like, I don't know. I really don't.
I'll tell you, probably pretty far left, because the thing about it is, this is my charge of like neoliberalism and neoliberal economics is, sure, the market's a really powerful force. I admire the market, all that kind of shit. But we're basically going through what amounts to a new industrial revolution. It's the information age. And kind of what happened during the old industrial revolution was 90% of people who were working in agriculture were no longer working in agriculture. They had to join industry. And then during like the 20s industrial revolution, a lot of people got kicked out of, industrial agriculture, and they had to move into the cities, and they had to find new jobs and new services, and jobs had to be created. Well, now we move to the service economy, where human beings are largely responsible just for service, but automation, which I don't know how many robots we can actually build to replace human beings, but it seems like automation is going to do a lot of damage to the service economy. And then what? Yeah. And nobody has an answer to that question about how do humans, pay for rent, pay for food, pay to raise their kids, and educate their kids in a world that may not need their labor. And we haven't answered that question. So being a smart person, hopefully me and my family will be okay, and we'll figure it out, and we'll always have something to contribute to the economy. But that leaves a lot of people who are fucked. And those people are turning to fascism or socialism as solutions to them being fucked.
Yeah. One area I feel like where I'm going to significantly shift left when we reach that full automation is probably college. Like the idea of free college has been around for a while, and we started talking about a lot more thanks to Comrade Sanders, of course. But I feel like we're going to need to have free college, or else you're just going to have so many people who just, completely fall off the edge of society because, you're going to become much more specialized, and you're going to need not only a lot of people in STEM, but you're going to need people in these high-skilled fields that are over-specialized. But do you know how much universal secondary education costs? I don't know how much 4 years would cost. One year is $78 billion. Do you know how much we spend in Iraq annually? In Iraq? Oh no, not Iraq. Afghanistan. Excuse me. Oh. I think it's like 10 times that. It's 48. So we literally spend like 70% or 60% of what the budget should be for secondary education on a war that nobody even thinks about. So that's kind of where, when we have fiscal conservatives like my parents who are like bootstrappy, and they're like, oh well, my generation figured it out, you just need to figure it out. I'm like, I kind of get a little pissy, because it's like the political establishment pisses money
on things, and we don't even think twice about it. DoD and, you know, interventionist wars being one of them. We don't even think twice. So what's, you know, I'm all for investing in technology and military, and, you know, I'm kind of an apologist for the American empire, which I'm sure will get me canceled as soon as I explain it. But why can't we invest in our own people? Why is, what is it, like pre-K? Why is good quality education? Why is secondary education such a controversial thing? Why is healthcare such a controversial thing? Isn't the whole point of a country to basically take care of its fucking people? And that's where I get really frustrated with the right. But I'm also not willing to cede all of my political will to the left, because we get into some pretty obnoxious shit pretty quick. And it's not all culture war issues, and it's not all culture war issues that aren't worth fighting over. And that's where I get into some beefs pretty quick.
Yeah, I feel like when it comes to the issue of like funding things for our own people, I feel like there's a difference in between like America being a superpower / world leader versus an American empire. Like there are a lot of Western countries that do, like, if we're going to be completely honest, they basically, you know, outsource their defense budget to the US.
Right.
And we can still massively, you know, downsize the amount of spending in the military while providing defense for us and our Western allies. But
to me, it's not even a or position or proposition. It's an and. We can do both. Like Jesus Christ. Like if we stop spending money on so much stupid shit, we could probably afford some good shit. And also, I think we spend 24% of our GDP on healthcare, and Canada and the UK spend 17%. So if we spent 17% of our GDP on, you know, baseline healthcare for every normie in America, then the rich people can still, you know, I don't know, execute babies and harvest adrenochrome and live for 1,000 years and all that kind of bullshit. They can still harvest, you know, corpse tissue to live forever, and normal people can still have some level of healthcare that doesn't have an $8,000 deductible and cost $400 a month, you know? So that, I don't know. I get pretty frustrated.
Part of the reason why it costs so much is because we just don't have a healthcare system with universality. Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of universal system. Like, even if we have a UK style single payer system, or a multi-payer, or an Israeli style private payer, either way, any one of those three is going to be wildly cheaper than what we have now.
Yeah, we have the worst of all worlds.
Yeah, there's so many exceptions and complications, and it's just a complicated web of lies. And it's like, we can talk about how single payer systems like, you know, Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair complicated it a lot. But at the end of the day, it's still more simple and streamlined. So we just seriously need to streamline the system and be like, there's a very basic standard. But we don't have that.
Well, and I'm hoping, like, as concerning as the political will or the political shift left in the past, like, few decades is concerning. I do have concerns about it. What I'm hoping is that some of the progressive economic arguments, at least about redistribution, not about socialism, and kind of like more of the right-wing things about maybe not being a douche, but being libertarian in how people live, but conservative in what you think works. So that's the way that I'm conservative, where I think the vast majority of the population probably benefit from monogamy or serial monogamy. I think a vast majority of the population finds a lot of satisfaction in what constitutes a human life in having kids. So that's not everybody, right? I'm not saying it's everybody. You want to be, or not even if you want to be. If you are trans, if you are gay, if you're bisexual, polyamorous, whatever, like whatever unique expression of sexuality, identity, whatever, you can take that on, especially if it fits you like a glove, and do so. But there needs to be kind of like a normal, whatever you want to define that as, that's healthier, that doesn't enjoy hard drugs, that kind of is more moderate in their life ambition, that it's okay to be a normie, basically. And that's where I would say there was a lot of cultural pressure in the millennial generation to be like, no kids, no responsibility, never grow up, let's go to Ibiza, let's do ecstasy, let's have orgies, let's drink forever, let's stay up till 6 a.m, don't listen to your parents, they're a bunch of fogies. And like obviously that's like partially every teenage group coming of age, like and there's something to be said for like teenage rebellion, but I think we went a little overboard. I think we went a little crazy.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to that, so, like, and also the idea of being monogamous, I think something important is that we reframe some older ideas in a more progressive light. Like the idea of monogamy, you don't have to do it in like the same religious way that used to do it, and I think you can frame it in a way that doesn't like exclude sort of like LGBT people.
Yeah.
A good example of this is the idea of waiting till marriage. It's like, well, we used to say that because, you don't want to have kids before that, but it's like that doesn't apply to gay people. A better way of doing it is like, oh, you should wait to have sex because you should save it for the person you love most, or for people are committed to. Like you shouldn't start doing it in the honeymoon phase of a relationship. You should do it after like you've had to deal with some fights and some hardship, and that you really love it. And like that that applies to everyone. It applies to gay people, it applies to trans people. So it's more progressive.
And that's my thing too, because when you start talking about like sexual conservatism, familial conservatism, or they're like, oh well, you just want to put me in a box, and I'm like, no, you do you, but I think we need to be honest. I think we need to be honest that the more sexual partners you have, the more diseases you have. I think you need to be honest that a lot of people can't firmly split sex and emotion. So when they have sex with people, their emotions get wrapped up into other people, and every sexual relationship that you have potentially has an emotional cost to it. I think you need to be honest that in a free-for-all environment, there's a high risk to run into either predatory or damaged partners who can basically exact a toxic toll on you. I think we need to be honest about that. I think we need to be honest about the fact that like we need to look at studies and all that kind of shit and see like if monogamy, serial monogamy, polygamy, all that kind of stuff, if there's negative exterior societal effects. So for instance, I brought this up in the sex discourse, sex debate that we had, I think on Dylan Burns, but it might have been Prime too. Where we basically talked about, it's something that Jordan Peterson brought up, where it's like in a polygamous society, like sex becomes a commodity, and the only people who have access to it are one, the people who hold the commodity, which is stereotypically women, because men, whether it's genetic or cultural, doesn't really matter. Men seem to be pretty aggressive about sex. And then two, it's the people who are wealthy. So basically, like wealthy men have a disproportionate amount of influence. They have the ability to control their material conditions, so they can be polygamous, whereas poor men have very limited options. And as a result, there's an entire underclass of people who are left behind in a polygamous society. So that's where, and also like, by the way, if you're looking at war and conflict, who are the primary participants in war and conflict? It's single
men.
Single
men.
Single, desperate, destitute men. So if we're not interested in creating a sexual underclass of single, desperate, destitute men, we need to talk about social structure. And not every social structure is going to be as advantageous as every other social structure. So that's where I want to balance, like, I want to balance individual liberty. So you individually do whatever the fuck you want. But we're going to, as a society, talk about this intelligently, and we're going to promote what's healthy. And that's kind of, and that's not even to call, like, being trans or gay or polygamous or anything like that unhealthy. But being polygamous has a lot of social social costs that are not
Yeah.
predictable, like or promiscuous. And we kind of talked about that earlier with like disease and toxic partners and bad relationships.
And emotions connecting to it. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is an area where like my libertarianism kind of stops, because like I'm a civil libertarian when it comes to government, but it's like I'm not in favor of a libertarian society. I think when it comes to social issues, I like the idea of a libertarian government. But when it comes to society, it's like, no, I think there's some things we should dissuade. We should probably dissuade polygamy. We should probably dissuade hookup culture. And there are some things we should probably, kind of promote, like the idea of, being more modest, having a monogamous relationship. Like, these are good things for you.
Shut up, Nazi.
Yep. I can't believe you're promoting that in society. You're such a fascist.
Right? Yeah. And that's where like I think we need to have a heart to heart with lefties, where it's like, listen, okay, I love you. I love my trans brothers and sisters. I love my and my MB folk. I love my gay brothers and sisters. I love my black brothers and sisters. I love my Hispanic brothers and sisters. I love my Muslim brothers and sisters. But some things are not fascism. Some things are healthy. Some conservative things are worth preserving or worth conserving. And even if you individually make the choice not to value those things in your life, there's some things that I'm going to promote to my kids. There's some things that I think should be promoted to all kids. And to just pretend that it's all purely arbitrary. See, and this is the other thing that really frustrates me. One, principles are arbitrary. No set of principles are as good as any other set of principles, and anybody can hold any set of principles and they will probably be good. Two, that these principles are universal already. So you don't have to advocate for truth telling or not stealing or not killing or pacifism or monogamy. You don't have to advocate for these things culturally because they're already universal, which is bullshit. It's a lie. People do not believe in telling the truth equally. People do not believe in people do not have the same moral calculation when it comes to violence. People do not have the same moral calculations when it comes to economics. And to promote a healthier perspective about, sexual relations, health, economics, personal finances, personal management, emotional management, all that kind of stuff. Promoting that is not some form of tyranny. Or even if it is some form of tyranny, as long as it's done in like a liberal way where you can pick your path, but here's what we recommend, that's not something that I'm going to concede any ground on.
Yeah, it's like government is not the instrument we're using. So there's still some more form of liberalism to it in a way. And it's like, it goes back to what I was saying about healthcare. Like, this is just a streamlined way of doing it. If we can have like 95% of a society agree on how to deal with certain basic things like telling the truth and violence and, stealing and stuff like that, and then it's like, that's just a streamlined system.
Right. Where we don't have to have these arguments about like every single moral principle that should be evidently obvious is positive. And like I'm not like if people are trying to like draw that out too far, I think you need to have a nuanced conversation about personal economics, violence, lying, a truthful society, what's principle, what's moral, what's virtue. Like, I think we should have conversations like this. But what I will not accept from liberals or progressives, what I won't accept is, one, it's arbitrary, and two, the good things are already universal. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
It's bullshit. The good things need to be reinforced. The bad things need to be called out. And some things are obviously bad. So for instance, like, I don't think I would have any problems with any liberal or progressive if I was like, hey, taking dogs, injecting them with steroids, keeping them in tiny cages in your backyard, torturing them every single day, and then sticking them into fighting pits is a bad thing. Like, I don't think I would get any pushback from anybody. But at the same time, there are people in our society, Hispanic folk and black folk, who have no problem with that. They actually think it's cool. They think it's a great hobby to take fighting dogs, inject them with steroids, keep them in their backyard, and then fight them for money. They think that's socially acceptable. It's not. And you have to fight it, and you have to call it out. You have to call it evil and bullshit. You have to impose your morality, and if your morality is violated, you have to institute social consequence. And that's just like one thing that I hope most people would see as a moral wrong almost self-evidently.
I think most people do, because I feel like this is something that, very few people, like these people who participate in dogfighting, are going to publicly advocate for, like, hey, maybe this is okay. And then, like, when it comes out, like when Michael Vick, I think he was the one who had that scandal, right? The NFL player who was involved in dogfighting. Like, he was immediately dropped from the team. I think the entire media came out and condemned him, because I think most people have this instinct of like, hey, this is wrong. Like, dogs are to be owned and to be loved. And it's like, you take them on a walk and, you give them treats. You don't shove them in a cage, give them fucking steroids and make them fight other dogs to the death. Right. And most people see that as wrong, because most people have a similar perception of how to treat dogs.
Right, but that's my point, is like, and it's not so much like this unique example, but it's more about like, are there things that some people perceive differently from a moral basis, and is there, from our perspective, a right answer and a wrong answer, and a right answer worth culturally enforcing and legally enforcing? And that's where I think I bump into a lot of naivete with some progressive folk and some liberal folk and some lefty folk, where I'm like, hey, here's all the things that I think need to be promoted in society. And they have two arguments for me, which is, one, kind of like principles and virtues are, kind of arbitrary. So who are you to enforce these cultural norms? And then two, we already value these things already, so they don't need to be enforced. And I just don't believe that. Like, I don't believe it at all. But
I mean, I definitely agree with the second one, but the first one is kind of hard to like, go against. Like, the idea of the government shouldn't enforce any moral ideas is just like, I mean, I don't see myself ever being divorced from that idea. So I think maybe some gradient of like the argument that like, oh, if we just legalize drugs and prostitution, then this is the government essentially saying that these things are okay. It's like, well, maybe it depends on, that gets more into the nuance of how we regulate it once it's legalized.
But I would say there are folks on the left who kind of like, they are like, hey, sex work is great, like all that kind of stuff. Like they'll concede it's
hashtag
like
sex work is work.
Right. Well, and it's not just that. So they talk about like destigmatizing and normalizing and like all that kind of stuff. And it's like, dude, I don't care about like, bodily autonomy or like how many like bodily autonomy arguments you bring to me. I am never going to tell my daughter or my son that I think it's acceptable for them to have sex with other people on camera and then to accept money for that. I don't. They like, there's a certain level, and like, I'm not trying to, attack anybody personally, but there's a certain level. So for instance, like if you're just an incredibly sex positive person, you haven't suffered any abuse, you do it voluntarily, it's fun for you, it fits into your moral framework, you're the unique person whose sex work is like
cough, destiny.
What's that?
Cough, destiny.
Kafka and Destiny?
Cough.
Oh, okay.
Like people will cough and
is he a prostitute?
Destiny.
But what is Destiny a sex worker?
No, but like he's like a very sex positive person, and he's talked about how he'll just do random Tinder hookups a lot.
Good for him.
Yeah. I mean, he and Melina are in in like an open relationship.
Right.
So.
But I almost guarantee you, if we were offline and I was talking to them, like either one of them, and I was like, hey, does a poly relationship present challenges that a monogamous relationship doesn't? The answer is obviously going to be yes.
He would totally answer yes.
Yeah, if they're like, are there jealousies and intrigues and like, are there social dynamics that have been toxic and like all that kind of stuff? Like, does that happen? And like, I'm sure their argument will be like, well, that happens in monogamous relationships too. But we have to like acknowledge, like, and this is where I get frustrated with talking with lefties and progressives. we have to acknowledge that putting your penis inside a vagina or a butt, or allowing your butt
or whatever,
your butt or your vagina to be penetrated with like a new person carries like some health risks, some social risks, some emotional risks, and not all of these things are positive. And like that's literally like the baseline of negotiation that I want to start from. And like actually what's really cool about the sex conversation we had was we were literally talking to a trans porn star, and she said all the same things I was saying. And I was like, okay, all right, there's room for concession and compromise and conversation. And what does a healthy sex life look like? What does an intelligent and emotionally intelligent relationship with sex, sexuality, and promiscuity look like? And I don't even think she would advocate for her lifestyle for everybody else, and she would concede that. So that's kind of where I was heartened by that conversation, that the people that I thought I was going to be fighting, we actually agreed with each other a lot.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, I think when it comes to polygamous relationships, most people who are versed know how to deal with the health risks, but I think it's the emotional risks, and most people are the exception to the rule. Like, I mean, anyone here who like watches Destiny or is a fan of Destiny knows that he is probably one of the most emotionally detached people in the world, and his heart is probably made of ice. Like, this dude does not have that many feelings for people. Like, that's pretty rare. But the thing is, most people are not like that. So we need to acknowledge that and be like, okay, well, you're the exception to the rule. Right. This is probably not good for most people.
Well, and rules necessitate exceptions, right? Like, unless it's like a universal law, like a physical law, rules almost like predict exceptions. So I'm perfectly comfortable with like making concessions and being like, hey, maybe some sex workers have a healthy relationship with their job. Maybe some sex workers, basically can have fun and fulfilling relationships and live their lives the way that they want to. And it's not my job to police them. But do I want to say that to children? Do I want to say that to teenagers? Do I want to promote that as like a society-wide rule that it's like, hey, you can fuck random people on camera. You can fuck as many people as you want. There's going to be no, there's not going to be that many emotional consequences. Anybody who judges you is an asshole. It's like, no, I'm not. That's my line. That's not going to happen. So I'm okay with the exceptions, but I'm not going to promote it. So
I mean, well, trying to have that conversation with your kids is a whole fucking box of worms. Yeah. But I think when it comes to like destigmatizing it, like I agree with you. There are exceptions, but we probably shouldn't normalize it, because again, it's not normal to be like that. It's exceptional, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. But I think it's interesting that you brought up having this conversation with your kids, because I feel like there's a very common phrase that should be used more with parenting that I wish was said to me. And that is, no, you're not. You're too young to know that. And I think this is especially true when it comes to like trans issues or like sexuality. Like, kids are like, there's just a point where like kids are not young enough to know this. Like, if you have a 9-year-old who's telling you for a while, like, oh, I feel like I'm a boy, you should still continue watchful waiting until they're like 13 or 14. And you need to tell that 9-year-old, no, well, maybe you are, but you're too young to know that, Well,
and this is where I'll show that I've been actively consuming, lefty and progressive propaganda or whatever, is that like, it's the 8 or 9 is when like your sex hormones kind of start kicking in, even at like a minute level. So puberty blockers are kind of like important at that age if you're going to have like an ideal transition, I guess. So that's kind of where I think we do need to have a nuanced conversation, and even as conservatives or people who are more conservative need to consider like the science, the life, because so for instance, like RGR Riley Grace Rochon. She has a series of videos, and one of the indicators for a person potentially being trans was that, like, in utero, they're exposed to a higher level of like sex hormones. So if you were looking at somebody, because just to run through it really quick, we kind of like genetically, I know I'm saying this incorrectly, but I still think it's true. You kind of start out, I guess, like XX or female, and then like a bombardment of sex hormones basically transitions you into male, develops the penis, changes the shape of the gonads and all that kind of stuff. And that's where I think that for people who are very scientific or people who are rationally minded, there can be a concession there that it's like, okay, well, it's pretty clear that for a decent amount of like straight cis het people or whatever, we're not all attracted to dudes, right? Like I'm very attracted to females.
Same here. I like dudes.
There's some kind of genetic switch that got flipped where my wife predominantly likes males and I very much like females. And there's some kind of hormonal shift that happened there. So whether or not it's genetic, environmental, whatever, there's the potential that homosexuality is genetic or hormonal or environmental or a mix of all those factors. Same thing with trans folk, where maybe all the bombardment of hormones that happened didn't quite happen in the sequence enough that they like fully moved across the gender binary to fully male or, fully female or whatever. And that's where, for me, it's like, do I want somebody to transition at the age of 8 or 9? Maybe not. Maybe a social transition, maybe the puberty blockers or whatever. But I'm also like, the science is not out. Like, we need to figure this out over the next 20 or 30 years. What we do now will have answers 30 years from now because all of this related field is so new. Like, we just don't understand it.
Well, I mean, you're right about like homosexuality being like possibly genetic or formed in utero, because when you mentioned the bombardment of hormones, something that immediately went to my mind is like I've heard about certain gay twin studies. Like I took AP Psych senior year, so this is still fairly fresh in my mind. But it's that it's very common that in gay twin studies they found that a lot of these identical twins, they were exposed to a more than average amount of estrogen. And that is part of the reason why, they ended up being gay. And so I feel like that's the big issue that we talk about when it comes to trans kids, is that a lot of the time they might say they're trans, but it turns out they just grow up to be perfectly happy cisgendered gay adults. And so it's hard to know whether is my kid actually trans or are they actually gay, or are they just thinking this for some unbeknownst reason?
Well, and that's something that's really interesting, because I know Jordan Peterson specifically had a peer who was basically canceled because he announced the fact that I think he was one of like the leading psychologists in Canada who said that, or who was studying like trans folk. And he basically said that like 80% of people by the time they were 25 had acclimatized to a cisgendered homosexual identity by the time they were 25. So that's like a high rate. I haven't seen the statistics. I don't know the stats. I'm not there. I'm not the scientist. I haven't even read the studies. So that's where I kind of want to leave it to the smarter people. I want to leave it to scientists. I want to leave it to smart folks to figure that shit out. And I'm not going to make a definitive statement one way or the other. But what I do think we should do, if we were to label ourselves conservatives, conservatism carries a lot of weight in American society. Oftentimes it's associated with like Christianity. And one of the driving moral forces in Christianity is kind of like empathy and understanding and compassion towards people that even you don't agree with or like. Like even people you consider like political enemies, you're supposed to be compassionate to. And that's where, so for me personally, like I like these people just fine. I don't really care. I'm not like I'm not a literalist. I'm like a cultural Christian. But I also think that we should kind of, rather than being set in a factional camp and be like, no, fuck you, I understand everything, my worldview is correct, and this is the way that it's going to be. Whether that's left or right, I think we need to be a lot more like nuanced and charitable and empathetic and compassionate, where we're like, hey, this is what I think. This is the information that I've been given that makes me think this way. I think I'm correct. But at the same time, like, hit me with your best shot about why you think you're correct. And then that's where I would actually like to see like Twitch politics and politics in general go, is not this I know everything, fuck you perspective.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the most important point you made of like those 4 or 5 was I'm not the scientist, which is something that I always will talk about whenever there's an issue that has a lot of science behind it. It's like, I'm not the scientist, I'm not the economist, I'm not the expert, I'm willing to leave it up to the experts. And I think that's a big thing. I think that's one of the most dangerous things about an anti-establishment worldview, whether it's like the populist right faction that Donald Trump has created, or the left-wing one, where it's like, oh, I'm not funded by corporations, I'm not like the establishment, is that, well, no, it's good to have politicians who have been surrounded by experts for a decade or two, because they just know the right answers. And it's not good to have someone anti-establishment come in. And like a good example of this is Trump and his foreign policy. He's like, well, I just think we should get troops out of the Middle East.
I know more than the generals.
Like, dipshit, it's more complicated than that. You can't just pull out immediately. I mean, we saw that in northern Syria. Like, we just totally abandoned the Kurds there. And we also saw, like John Bolton mentioned in his book, that Trump multiple times just casually brought up the idea of leaving NATO.
Yeah.
And I read that and my mind wanted to explode, because it's like, how can you just nonchalantly bring up possibly the biggest shift in geopolitics in the past fucking century?
Yeah.
Like, I think we should just leave NATO. They don't pay enough. It's like, just casually bringing that up, like not realizing how dangerous that is insane to me.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's why it's good to have people like Joe Biden, who have been in the Senate for over 2 decades. They've been surrounded by experts. They've been talking to generals. They've been talking to economists. They know like the actual answers and have good ideas that are formulated by being surrounded by experts.
Hopefully. And then
yeah.
Yeah, and then that was the thing that I was going to say too. I think we all saw the Kurds getting fucked over coming from a mile away, because we did it in the first Persian Gulf War. I hope the Kurds were like, they could have been pissed, but I hope they were kind of ready for it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would actually love an independent Kurdistan. I would like to pull out of every other place in the Middle East and North Africa except for Kurdistan. Make Kurdistan like a sovereign nation, and then that's just like a mousetrap. Like, if somebody attacks the Kurds, then, or if something crazy breaks off, then we use that as like a base of operations. But that's neither here nor there. So we're hitting about the 90-minute mark, which is kind of where I would want to be, so I could like stop recording and I could kind of post this as a video. I wouldn't mind bullshitting for a minute afterwards though, but was there anything else that you wanted to say, just in case people in my audience are unfamiliar with you and they kind of want to find you either on like Twitter or Twitch or whatever?
Yeah, so nothing really more, but I guess I'll just shout myself out to make this a clean wrap up. I'm Shadows of Liberty. I stream on Twitch. That's my name. If you want to find me on Twitter, it's @shadows_liberty. You can find me on YouTube too, but I have like 0 videos. Hopefully I plan to change that in 2021, but for now, you can find me over at Twitch and follow me over on Twitter if you want to see cute cat pics that I like to tweet out every once in a while.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya. Bye.